All right, Brian. So now we're going to get into Ohio State's defense, and we're going to start to break down what makes this defense so dangerous, what makes them so effective. Because we said it yesterday, this has been the side of the football for the Buckeyes that has been the most constant. Similar to Notre Dame's offense, Ohio State's offense has been a little bit up and down, right? And there's many key factors for that. We covered a lot of that in the show yesterday. But Ohio State's defense has been the one, outside of one performance on October 12th against Oregon, has been their one constant and something that they can always rely on. So what makes this defensive unit so good, right? I mean, there's a lot of factors. Jim Knowles is into his third year, similar to Al Golden being in his third year. They're very experienced. They have experience at every level, and at most positions on defense, they have an abundance of it, right? But this defense has been really, really, really good this season, Brian.
You know, I just love the consistency we've seen from this defense. Like you mentioned, I mean, you had the one bad game. Like Notre Dame had one bad game. I'd say Notre Dame had defensively had one bad game and one bad half. I'd say against Penn State, they weren't good in the first half. It still held them to 10 points, you know, which is pretty good. But you had one bad half of football. That's to me what led me to say that this Notre Dame team and this Ohio State team are the two best teams in college football, is because there is a level of consistency. Like even when Ohio State's offense went through some tough stretches, they were still a team capable of winning games because of their defense. Their defense just kind of showed up week after week. And yeah, and part of the issue in the Oregon game was I just don't think they played well. Like just like I don't think Oregon played very well. I mean, Ohio State was the better team. I picked Ohio State to win. I'm not shocked that they won. But Oregon played poorly on top of Ohio State playing well. And it wasn't always Ohio State forcing them to play well. Sometimes they were just not playing well. That's going to happen sometimes. And guess what Ohio State did? They took full advantage of it and whooped them pretty good. But, you know, Trev, when I look at it, that's the thing I love about this team is when I break down the film is just that level of consistency from the defense. You know, it really is impressive because, as you mentioned, I mean, Notre Dame's had their moments where their offense has struggled, and Ohio State certainly had theirs. You know, they both played 15 games. Notre Dame has scored in the 20s, less than 30, I should say, 6 times this year, 3 times in the playoff, and Ohio State has scored less than 30 points 4 times this year, including a season low of 10 against Michigan. And, scored 21 against Nebraska, 20 against Penn State, 28 against Texas. But they could do that and still win because this defense is just every week just plays big-time football.
Yeah, I mean, their defense has held every single opponent outside of one across 2 games under 21 points.
Right.
That's impressive no matter what way you spin it. And let me preface this by saying Ohio State did play good competition in the playoffs. They did play good competition in the regular season. But even if they didn't, holding basically 13 of your opponents, because 2 games were to Oregon, all under 20 points scored, is crazy. I mean, that is a heck of a defensive stat. And Brian, that speaks to the consistency level that you're talking about. And for Notre Dame, it's similar boat on defense, right? Where does consistency come from? Experience, great scheme, great coaching, players being bought in to what they're running on defense. They have belief in it. They have clarity in it. They're able to execute it at the highest level because they're not thinking too much.
Yeah.
And that's Ohio State's defense, man. They have clarity in what they're doing. They have so many guys on that defense that are now in their 3rd year of that system. Right? Mm-hmm. Tyleik Williams, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Cody Simon, all of these guys are in. I think Lathan Ransom.
Even Sonny Styles. Lathan Ransom's a senior. Yeah.
Yes.
Denzel Burke's a senior.
Yes.
Davison Igbinosun is a junior, but he's been in the system. He was a transfer, but he's been in the system now 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's funny that, they talk about transfers for Ohio State, the big impact they've had. They've had one transfer make a big impact. One this year transfer make a big impact, and it was Caleb Downs. Everybody else was a returner, as far as the starting lineup. And this is you talk about experience. This Ohio State defense reminds me a lot of last year's Notre Dame defense. Not in results or style. I'm just saying, like, last year's Notre Dame defense was so experienced. I mean, you had 5th and 6th years across the board. Notre Dame is actually a very weird defense this year in that there's a couple 5th and like some RJ Opens a 6th year, Mills is a 5th year, Cross is a 6th year, and then Kaiser's a 6th year, and then Xavier Watts is a 5th year, and then it's a bunch of freshmen and sophomores.
I know.
You know what I mean?
And it's a bunch of guys at first year starting.
Right.
Like,
And you know, it's kind of funny that way, but Ohio State's a very veteran group, and to your point, they don't beat themselves. And that's been a big reason for their success this year is that right there, Trev, is they've been an elite unit from the beginning of the year to now. And it's another reason why I've said these are the 2 best teams in college football, because they're the 2 best defenses. And I say defense will get you to the show, but offense is going to have to win it, right? And that's what this matchup is about for Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's defense is going to be able to play well to some degree against Ohio State, but you're going to need your offense to step up and help you out. There's going to be a stretch in the game where Ohio State's offense is going to be feeling it, and they're going to get some points. You got to answer, you know, and I mean, let's be honest too. If it wasn't for the Notre Dame defense stepping up big last year in multiple red zone situations, that game might not have been close.
No.
I mean, they stopped them at the 1 yard line. They had another red zone stop in the first half. You know, the defense had to make some big plays to keep it from really getting out of hand until the offense finally figured it out in the 3rd quarter. And they figured it out for 2 drives. You know, and that's the big thing is you can't do that again in this game, Trevor. You can't. You can't wait till the 3rd quarter to get going in this game. And because this team is just too good defensively. They'll choke you out. And man, it is good. And look, they're built somewhat structurally as we kind of dive into what the scheme for Ohio State is. They're built somewhat structurally similar to Notre Dame. Yeah. You know, they're a 4-2-5 team that will a lot of times line up in that in 4-3 personnel. You know, I've seen games. I think it was the Michigan State game I was watching where they had Sonny Styles playing his normal position. They actually had it looked like they had Arvell restarting at Mike, and then it was Shane Simon was at the will, is what it looked like to me. So they had all 3 of their linebackers in the starting lineup. And because why? Because Michigan State's a 12 personnel run the football team. And we've seen them be able to get into that, but they'll still move Styles all around and, you know, kind of got him back into his rover days. They don't call it the rover, but that's what it's Notre Dame's rover. And then there's games where they'll line up in 4-2-5 with 5 DBs in the game the whole time, depending on what the opponent does. So, you know, they're very physical up front. They're very gap sound, a lot like Notre Dame. They will – a couple differences schematically, Trevor, with this team. Number one, they don't blitz their linebackers quite as much as Notre Dame if they don't have to. Like Notre Dame blitzes their linebackers all the time because they want to, not because they have to. Ohio State will blitz their linebackers at times. I'm talking base downs, 1st and 2nd down. They won't always. There's been games where I don't see their linebackers blitz at all. And when they do, they're like at the snap, run stunts and things like that. They'll heat people up on 3rd down for sure. But on 1st and 2nd down, they don't do as much of that. And that's one structural thing. And then number 2 is they play a lot more zone than Notre Dame does, who's primarily a man defense.
I mean, the thing that I really like about their personnel groupings, when you talk schematically, the thing that makes their scheme work really well is they have a lot of length on defense, right? You go through and you look at their defensive line unit, right? Like going level to level. JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, both 6'5" guys, right? I mean, Tyleik Williams, he's a little bit shorter than them. Like, I think he's 6'3".
He's shorter, but he seems to have pretty good length because he gets into people, man.
Yeah. No, he's shorter at 6'3", but he's shorter in comparison to the 6'5" JT and Jack Sawyer, but he has really good length, still good size. He's a 300-plus pounder. Same thing with Ty Hamilton is another 6'3" guy.
He's had a really good year.
Yes,
like a really good year for them.
Yeah. Yeah, Ty Hamilton has stepped up. Like he's been a really good player for them. And then you get into like the second level of the defense, right? Cody Simon's a 6'2" guy. Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese are both 6'4". Those are very long linebackers. Sonny Styles
is long.
Yeah, man. Yes.
He is really long.
He is. And their length, when you go through and you break down their stats, like there's a reason why their defensive line has so many batted down passes. right? I mean, Jack Sawyer has 6, like in just the raw stats, 6 passes defended. JT has 3. Tyleik Williams has 1. Kenyatta Jackson Jr. has 1. Caden McDonald has 1. And then you get to the second level where you start talking about they have 2 6'4" linebackers. Their smaller linebacker is 6'2". And then you get into their secondary. They have longer corners. Davis Enigbenosin is 6'2". Denzel Burke is 6'1". Their safeties are like safety size. Like Lathan Ransom, he's a 6'1" kid. Caleb Downs is 6 foot. Jordan Hancock's a decent-sized nickel at 6'1". So they have good size and length throughout their defense, man. I mean, that's one thing that on top of a really good scheme and their experience, they're very long. They can eat up a lot of space, man.
We've talked a lot about how disruptive the Notre Dame defense is from a secondary standpoint. And Notre Dame this season ranks 7th in college football in pass breakups. They have 61. Ohio State's one spot ahead of them with 63. Now, Notre Dame has more passes defended because Notre Dame has 9 more interceptions than Ohio State. But Ohio State has 63 pass breakups. And when you start talking about how they got more than 10 of them from the D-line, that kind of plays. But it's also they play smart football. They know, like, hey, I'm not winning on this rush. It also speaks to they're not as aggressive as Notre Dame. They're willing to say, hey, we're going to keep things in front of us. They'll play more off coverage. Now, I'm very curious if they're going to play as much off coverage against Notre Dame as we've seen them play in other games. I would think that you'd maybe want to kind of come up and press Notre Dame a little bit more, not let Notre Dame get its quick game going. We've seen some teams do that. Penn State did a little bit more of that against Notre Dame than they have. And I think Notre Dame, that's why Notre Dame was able to make some big plays, because Penn State went away from what they normally do. So maybe then I shouldn't see that. But I could see them being more aggressive with their corners, especially into the boundary, Trev, in this game. But so they're built differently from a schematic structural standpoint, and Notre Dame likes to attack. But Ohio State attacks a little differently. They're more willing to keep things in front of them, rally to the ball, be sound tacklers. They're more willing to let their 4-man rush get after the quarterback. And that's a big reason why Ohio State doesn't blitz as much, because they have a defensive line that can get to the quarterback, that can shut down the run by itself. And then that allows their linebackers to roam free and run to the ball. And they've got athletic linebackers. Cody Simons turned out to be a heck of a football player. He really has turned out to be a heck of a football player. Arvell Reese is going to be a future Big Ten star. I mean, he's a really good linebacker. Sonny Styles is really athletic. We'll talk more about some things you can do to take advantage of him later, but he's still really athletic, and that allows him to make a lot of plays. So I'm curious how they treat Notre Dame's pass game. Do they kind of still do what they've done? Which, if they do, I think there's some things there for Notre Dame to take advantage of that some other teams couldn't. But I think Notre Dame also needs to be prepared for them to come up and be more aggressive and play more man. And we'll see if Notre Dame's able to win in that regard. But that's kind of where they're at schematically. I mean, they slant a lot. They don't do a ton of twists, but they do some. I think you fully expect them to do more of that in this game because of how much Notre Dame has struggled with it.
Yeah.
But they're a really aggressive slant team. They line up with their their defensive ends on one side. You know who Jack Sawyer's going against, and you know who JT's going against. I mean, they don't flip their ends a whole lot. So, I mean, you kind of know who's going to be where with their defense, more so than you do Notre Dame. But that's fine because they know how to play. They've got their refined technique. I only have to play right-handed. I only have to play left-handed. And it works for them. And then they have talented players. That's the other thing too, right? It's Jim Knowles doesn't do anything different here than he did at Oklahoma State or at Duke. Really, I mean, it's still similar philosophy. Difference is now he's got some dudes. He's got a bunch of NFL players on his defense.
Yeah. And I mean, if you want any more of a testament to Jim Knowles, I mean, his last year at Oklahoma State, I mean, he had like the number 5 rush defense, the number 4 total defense. I mean, he was top 5 in several different categories. I have an article coming out about it later today, just kind of rattling off some of his stats when he was in his final year at Oklahoma State. But you're right. I mean, but that bump up in talent, right, has taken them from like 4th best, 5th best to now in some categories they are the best defense in college football, right? And we've been saying it all week. Notre Dame and Ohio State, to me, interchangeable. When you start talking about the best defense in college football, there's a reason why they're 1-2 or 2-1 in different categories. And so it's a testament to what Jim Knowles has been able to do with this group. But you're right. I mean, it's in the games where Ohio State, I can't even say in the games, in the moments where their defense has struggled, it's their four-man rush hasn't been able to generate pressure. That was a big issue against Oregon in October, is Dylan Gabriel was sacked 0 times.
Not pressured a lot.
Nope.
Yeah.
And then you go through like early on, and when I mean early on, I mean like the first 2 offensive possessions that Indiana had, their four-man pressure wasn't able to get home.
Same with Michigan State. I mean, Michigan State was running on Ohio State early. They were pushing them off the line, and they were giving their quarterback time to throw the football, Child's time to throw the football. And they were moving the ball on Ohio State early. They turned it over on downs. They had an interception or had a fumble deep in Ohio. I mean, I think Child's fumble in the first half was at like the 10.
Yeah, it was inside the red zone for sure.
And it's because you're controlling the line of scrimmage. Doesn't happen often, but when you do have success against them, that's where it starts. You're 100% correct. That's where it starts.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why Jim Knowles switched up a few things and started bringing significantly more linebacker pressure in the IU game. We talk about how much Curtis Rourke was under pressure in that game. Cody Simon had 2.5 sacks in that game because their four-man front wasn't able to get home. And then that's kind of when the difference in athleticism started to take over for Ohio State, is once they were starting to get pressure, their receivers just weren't able to win one-on-one against Denzel Burke, against Davis Enigmanosum, against Jordan Hancock in the slot. I mean, you go through and you break down this defense. They have playmakers at every level. I've been saying this for weeks. Caleb Downs is probably the best open field tackler in any secondary in college football. So I know we'll talk about it more, but I've been tooting the horn of Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love all year, that especially when healthy, I don't know if there's anybody that can bring them down in the open field. I do think Caleb Downs could be, not from a speed perspective, not that he's slow. It's just Jeremiah Love has top level speed when healthy. But if there is somebody that I don't like, it's going to be a battle to see, that I think that will trade blows. Caleb Downs is the guy that can bring people down very well in the open field, which will be fun to talk about when we get there, man. But yeah, I mean,
Lathan Ransom's turned out to be a pretty good he's become a much better tackler this year as well, as he's gotten more experience and more time in their system as well. And like, there was a couple plays I'm watching them against Iowa and I'm watching against Michigan State last night, Trev, and I'm like, okay, this play right here, that's going to be the difference in this game. Where it's like it's blocked up and the running back has a cutback and it's him and Caleb Downs in the hole. And if you make him miss, strike up the band. If he tackles you, it's a 1-yard gain. And this season, Notre Dame's been able to make those plays. Can they make those against Ohio State? You don't got to make them every time. You just got to make 2 or 3 of them. And it's a difference in the ball game. But so far this year, I mean, part of the reason Jim Knowles does what he does is because he has Caleb Downs to do it. And that's not somehow kind of diminishing what Jim Knowles does. That's what every coordinator does. I mean, Al Golden would not be able to successfully run the defense he wants to run if it wasn't for having the corners that he has. I mean, that's coaching, right? And so, but that allows him to do some of the things he does where they don't have to blitz. But like you said, they had to blitz more against Indiana, and it worked against Indiana. I don't know that they necessarily are going to want to have to do that against Notre Dame, because if they're struggling to stop Notre Dame early, then that's not a great sign. And Riley Leonard's a little bit more effective kind of getting out of that stuff. And if you hit him, you bring him down, great. But if you miss on him, as Penn State found out, that could result in some big plays. And so that's going to be one of those chess matches in this game. In this regard is, you're going to be bringing pressure at times, but can you pick it up? But they're going to try to dominate the game with their front four. That's who they are. And if they can, then Notre Dame's going to have a long day. Like if the front four dominates, it's going to be a long day. And what happened last year in the second half when Notre Dame started winning that game, and why we were so frustrated with some of the play calling on that final drive, is you were starting to lean on Ohio State and really move them off the ball, and then you stopped doing it. Now, here's the difference. You don't have Joe Alt and Blake Fisher on this team. But that doesn't mean you still can't do it. And that's going to be a big key in this game, is can you do that in this game? Or is the defensive line going to dominate this game? That's good. I mean, we'll talk more about it in the matchups part, but that's the thing that makes this defense really good is they don't have to bring pressure. They don't have to, their safeties can play a lot of cleanup ball, which is why their safeties make a lot of tackles. Their safety. It used to be, Trev, where you didn't want your safeties making a ton of plays. You didn't. Well, Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom are third and fourth on their defense and tackles at 77 and 73. They've got 88 combined solo tackles this year. 10 years ago, that's probably a bad sign. That means that they're but what it means for them is if you look at like Notre Dame and how good their safeties are, Xavier Watts has 74 and Don Schuler has 55. Now, Rod Hurd has 36, and they don't have a third safety that plays as much as those two, right? So a little bit of context there. But the point is they ask a lot of their safeties, but it's not as stressful as it can be for other teams who are blitzing a lot, because then it's like the safeties are now playing cleanup, or they're fitting off of you force a bounce and their safeties are there to clean it up. You force a cutback and you're forcing it back into the safeties. And so but you can do that because you do have safeties that can play so well in space. And Notre Dame's going to have to make them pay for that a little bit. Can they do that? I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll find out.
And we'll
talk a little bit more about that when we get into the Keys to Victory show this week as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of the laundry list of questions that we're going to find out. You know what I mean? When we do finally get to watch this game on January 20th. Bryan, you were bringing up a couple things about, making Caleb Downs or Lathan Ransom miss in the hole and some of the things that they're going to have to do on offense in order to move the ball, in order to put points up on the board. And, I kind of wanted to start talking about, like the areas that Notre Dame does match up well against Ohio State. And one of the first things that we have down here is the run game, So, I mean, Ohio State does have a really, really stout rush defense. Mm-hmm. They're third in the country.
Behind Indiana and Ole Miss.
Okay. Yeah, two very good rush defenses, right? But in the games, in the moments that Ohio State has struggled, they have struggled to stop the run. Now, Tennessee couldn't generate anything through the air. They had trouble with a semi-mobile quarterback in Nico. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, but
I have the same problem. It's all good.
Yeah. So, but Nico at Tennessee had 2 rushing touchdowns against him, and I believe sacks included. He had 47 rushing yards against Ohio State's defense right now.
And that's what allowed them to kind of somewhat get back in that game, or if they could have made one stop to start the third quarter, they could have made that a 1-possession game.
Yeah. Yep. But then you go through and you look at what they did to Oregon and what they did to Texas. They held Texas to 58 rushing yards. Oregon ended the day with -23. Now, Dylan Gabriel was sacked quite a bit, but, there was a good amount of run stuffs around the -2, -1 to +1 to +2 on the offensive line. I think Jordan James going out. Whittington's a good running back for Oregon, but Jordan James leaving that game with an injury too did not help. But not trying to take anything away from Ohio State's defense. There's a heavy emphasis to stop the run because their first matchup, they struggled a little bit. That was a 155-yard performance, 2 rushing touchdowns, which, 155 rushing yards on the ground is not it's not anything somebody's going to write home about. But when you compound it with a really good dynamic passing offense that Oregon has, makes it really hard to stop. It's the same thing with Ohio State's offense. When they're at their best, they're around that 150 to 175 mark on the ground, but they're at 270 through the air, right? And so that's what makes that offense so dangerous, is when they're balanced. So you have down that Notre Dame matches up well in the run game.
Yeah, when they're playing their game. That's the thing is it's not that they match up well in the run game. It's about they have the ability to hurt Ohio State in the run game. And what has happened a lot this year, Trevor, is we have seen teams have some success early running the football in Ohio State, and then they have to completely abandon it because they fall behind. And Notre Dame is a team that can have some of that success. I talked a little bit about the Michigan State game. Michigan State was hanging with Ohio State early, and first play of the game, they rip off a nice cutback run for a big play. They were getting some juice. Childs was, who's a pretty athletic kid. I wouldn't call him a mobile quarterback yet, but he will be. But he's athletic. He hasn't quite his pocket presence needs a lot of work because he's spent most of the year at 18 years old. But you saw it in that game a little bit as well. You saw it a little bit against Iowa, where they were able early in the game to run the ball. I mean, Caleb Johnson, ran for 86 yards on 15 carries, and Brendan Sullivan, another back, had a 30-yard gain in that game. And the overall numbers weren't good because they couldn't run it a lot, but early in the game, they were able to have a little bit of success running football. We saw what Michigan was able to do to them this year as well. And so we've seen teams have some early success on them running the football. You mentioned what Jordan James was able to do against them early in that game. And he ran for over 100 yards that game. They ran for over $150 in that game. Dylan Gabriel scrambled for 30 yards. So we've seen them have some of those moments where they can be vulnerable against the run. Not when I mean vulnerable, I mean like, okay, they might give up $150 to $170. I'm not talking about you're going to go run for 3 bills on them. I'm not saying that. But like the Georgia game, I said against Georgia, you get the 150 against Georgia, you're going to win that football game. Now, this game might be a little bit different because this offense is better than Georgia's offense. But Indiana was a similar way. If you can establish the ground game early, which Notre Dame did against Indiana, who's got a very good run defense, and did a very good job of shutting Ohio State down until the final drive of the game. And so you look at it and say, I mean, Ohio State against Indiana rushed for 115 yards. I think like 39 of that came on the final drive of the game when Travion Henderson broke one when they were trying to, basically blitz and stop, get a stop. But Notre Dame was able to kind of get their ground game going early against Indiana. People say, well, if you take away the 90 and okay, that was great, but that play happened and they can do that against Ohio State. They have the backs, but look at the next drive. This is the one that everybody seems to forget. The 9-minute drive where they went 16 plays, and a lot of that was running the football. And it was 4 yards here, 6 yards there. You finally get a bounce, and Jadarian breaks one. And those drives are important, Trevor, because with this backfield, the more you can hang on to the ball, the more you can move the chains. And we'll talk about this on our Keys to Victory. The more opportunities that they will bust one. That's the big thing. Is like when you don't have the ball a whole lot, like they didn't in the first half against Penn State, the odds of your running backs breaking one are reduced because of opportunity. It's mathematics. And if you have a 15% chance of breaking a 60-yard run, well, guess what? If you have 70 plays compared to 50 plays, there's more opportunities at that rate to break one. And so that's kind of where I think it right there is, can Notre Dame, am I guaranteeing Notre Dame's going to run the ball on Ohio State? No, I'm not. Is it going to be easy to run the ball on against Ohio State? No, it won't. Will it be a 25, like Army, 20, was it like 29 carries for like 270 yards? No, it won't be like that. I don't think it'll be like that. If it does, we're going to have a fun post-game show, that's for sure. But it's more so you get to your 180 on 40 carries because you're grinding it out. You're getting that 6, you're getting that 4, and then occasionally you pop one for 20. And that's kind of what the goal is. Now, if you can bust one for 60 like you did against A&M, that's great. But I'm saying I don't think you need to rely on going for 60 against this defense. If you can, that's huge. But even the grinded out drives like they had against Indiana on drive 2 to jump to a 14-0 lead, you need to have some of those. And those are all things that factor into it, Trevor. So when you talk about how Notre Dame matches up, yeah, I think that's an area where I think they can handle themselves against Ohio State. And when you're going to win a game like this, you've got there's got to be some areas. And then part of that too is, you mentioned it earlier, Trev, the mobile quarterback piece.
For Notre Dame overall run game, man, it's in games like this, you have to do what got you here. And Bryan, that's something that you've said this entire playoffs. Do what you did to get you to this moment. Notre Dame isn't an offense that's just going to come out, drop back, and fire off 10 straight passes in a game before running the football. That's just not them. I don't know if that will ever be them. And I don't even think that's dictated by who's under center. I really don't. It's just their identity is establishing the ground game. Now, I do believe that the passing game could look a little different depending on who is under center, what they're able to do, push the ball down the field more vertically.
This offense would, in that regard, would look a lot different if they had Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr in there.
Right.
But that's not who they are.
Right. But establishing the ground game, and I've said it all postseason long. I've been saying it since the conference championship games. The teams that have been able to run the football gives themselves the best opportunity to win. And I don't really think that that's a secret recipe for success, but for Notre Dame, it's even more true, right? You go through and look at the second half of the Penn State game. They they matched what they rushed for in the entire first half in their first 2 carries of the game.
Yeah.
You're down by a score. It's 10-3. It's a touchdown game. You come out and you immediately start running the football, and it's effective, right? Jeremiah Love goes for 6, and then he goes from back-to-back rushes of over 9 yards. And so within 3 carries, you already bested what you did in the first half.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this one that we're about to talk about here, being a mobile quarterback, that was my number one. Like, that is I think Riley Leonard is the catalyst in this game that Ohio State just hasn't had a whole lot of experience with. I'm not saying that every single game for, 14 games, 15 games, they've just played a bunch of stiffs, right? Like, they didn't face 15 Jack Cones, like it's not that at all. However,
don't you speak negatively about my dude Jack Cohn.
I love Jack Cohn. He's not
I
mobile.
know he was a complete stiff in the pocket, but hey, listen, go ask USC, right, about his ability to tuck one and run. Oh, I'm totally kidding. I love Jack Cohn, but your point is valid. Jack Cohn is not a guy that you're like, I don't know if Jack's going to beat us with his legs today. That was never a concern.
No, but they have not faced a mobile quarterback like Riley Leonard, a runner like Riley Leonard. Dylan Gabriel has skill. Dylan Gabriel is also 5'11". Like he's Dylan. He's a
move the chains runner. That's what he is.
Yeah, absolutely. You could make the argument that from a size and athleticism standpoint, and I don't think the athleticism is all that close. The closest comp that they had to Riley Leonard was Drew Aller when they played him against Penn State. You know what I mean? And Drew Aller was their second leading rusher that game behind Tyler Warren, which is actually pretty crazy. But Ohio State's defense hasn't faced a mobile quarterback like Riley Leonard. And Riley Leonard isn't a type of kid that he can just move the chains. He can bust 1-2, right? Once he gets into the open field, he has that ability. So to me, Riley Leonard's the catalyst in this game. And not because I think that this is going to be the game that he goes out and he throws for 285 yards and 3 touchdowns. If he does, great. And if that happens, one of 2 things. Either this game is not close or Notre Dame was behind early.
This game is not close is the answer. I just don't know which direction it's not close.
True.
That's the statement. Like if he throws for 285, it's because Notre Dame just killed Ohio State. Or they're getting killed by Ohio State, and he's getting a lot of second half garbage yards in an attempt to try to come back from a 21-point halftime deficit.
Yep.
To your point. But the only thing I'd put, I think Nico's more mobile, more of a runner like Riley than is Drew Aller. And Dylan Raiola is another guy that had some success running the ball against them. He had a 38-yard run. He ended up rushing for 31 yards because he had some sacks taken away. But to your point, he'll scramble. Nico will scramble. They're not the designed runners that Riley Leonard is. But I actually think it's the scrambling that's going to be the biggest impact in this game, in my opinion, Trevor, of why I think Notre Dame has a chance to win. Because what is not discussed enough when you talk about Riley Leonard and his impact in the pass game is too many people just look at his impact in the pass game as passing attempts, passing yards, passing touchdowns, completion percentage.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of times this year where, it's a 3rd and 9 and Riley drops back and it's not there and he takes off running and moves the chains. I mean, he had 80 yards against Georgia. He had the 132-yard run. I think half of his yards were scrambles in that game. That's where Riley can have a big impact, and that's what makes him so much different is he can do that, which a couple other quarterbacks, Nico can do that. Drew Aller, a lot of his runs were on scrambles where you lose contain. And then, of course, Raiola, similar deal. Riley has that, but he's better at it than any of the other quarterbacks. But he also brings that running element to the table of the designed runs. And that's something that I think is true for anybody.
His improvisation, too, against Penn State was also fantastic. Moved the chains twice, both to Jaden Greathouse on broken scramble plays. I mean, he had that fantastic one on I think it was the game-winning field goal drive, where it was 3rd down. They meant to run out the clock. Everybody expected them to just run the football and bleed more time off the clock. And they called a sprint out left, and he found Jaden Greathouse rolling off of his left side And so I think that's some of the improvisation from Riley Leonard that is also something that needs to be taken into account for. It's those moments, right? I'm not saying that he's going to dance around in the pocket like Joe Burrow did in 2019 in the SEC championship game when he made Jalen Carter miss and threw it downfield to Justin Jefferson. Like, it's nothing like that, but it's the moments. Those are the chain movers that they haven't had at the quarterback position in these games before in the past, right? So for me, that's going to be a huge proponent one, Bryan. The third one that you had was Notre Dame's tight ends and their slot receivers.
I like how you put this all on me. So if it's a bad take, you're like, this is the third one that Bryan had. In case it turns out not to be accurate, it's totally his fault. Yeah, tight ends and slots. I mean, look at last year's game. I mean, we're going to talk about, when we get into matchups, part 4 of our show, we're going to talk about the outside receivers, and you have to make some plays outside. You have to.
Yep.
But you have to also be willing to attack them over the middle like they did last year. You got Mitchell Evans doing what he did. He had a great game last year. I don't know. I think Mitchell Evans, if he plays like he did against Penn State, that's a weapon. But there's matchups there that I like. If you look at, Jaden Greathouse had 2 catches for 40 yards last year. He had that one crossing route. Chris Tyree had a 25-yard gain last year. There are things you can do over the middle of the field if you're smart about it that can give them some problems if you have playmakers there. And as Notre Dame showed against Penn State, they have some playmakers in the slot. And we didn't even see really any of Jaden Harrison, although if you give him Riley more time on that first drive, as I've said and I pointed out, you've got Jaden Harrison wide open over the middle of the field for a big play. It was the second drive. Excuse me. The second drive. It was the drive of the interception. It was 2 plays before the interception on drive 2. You got him wide open over the middle of the field. You got to be smart about how you get to it. There's ways you can manipulate the Ohio State secondary to get some of those type of looks. Yeah. But that's an area where to attack this defense, you have to be willing to Marcus Freeman talks about, you got to be willing to attack 52 and a third. You know what I mean? Like, you've got to, and then vertically. You can't just say, well, they got Caleb Downs and they've got this, and so we're just going to throw outside all day. If that's going to be the case, you're going to have a long freaking day. You've got to be willing to find the right ways to attack over the middle of the field like they did last year. Now, some of it was a one-on-one, throw it up and let Mitchell Evans make a great catch. You can't assume you're going to replicate that.
Right.
But there were other opportunities. I mean, I pointed out on film after the game, Trevor, there was 2 or 3 times where Chris Tyree was just gone on a seam route, and Sam Hartman just didn't see him or didn't have time to see him. So you got to be willing to take – now, they didn't have Caleb Downs last year at safety, but their safeties weren't slouches last year, and one of them is still on the starting lineup. But you just got to be willing to not be afraid. Like, this is the big thing. You get on the stage, you can't coach scared. You can't be like, well, we're going to avoid that guy because they're really good. Well, just why don't you hand them the trophy and not put your players at risk of injury? You know what I mean? Like, you got to be willing to go at them. You got to be smart about it, when to do it, how to do it. But you also have to have playmakers there. And I do think Notre Dame has playmakers there with obviously Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridan. Also with, your running backs, which I'll get to a little bit later. Actually, I'll get to a little bit later. But, look what Texas did with their tight ends and running backs against Sonny Styles, who has allowed more catches than anyone on their defense this year. He's been a liability. I watched it against Michigan State. They went at him in the pass game. But, there was a play Michigan State did where they had their tight end in kind of a reduced look, and they ran their kind of like a slot fade-ish type of thing, and then they ran their tight end on like a little move to beat Sonny Styles. There's another play where they went right at Caleb Downs, but they ran a levels like a seam route behind him, and they hit a seam route over the middle because they did something to occupy his eyes where he had to kind of be in between, the high-low thing. You got to do things like that. If you're just running nothing but horizontal stretches where it's like you got to win a bunch of one-on-ones, that's not going to be a recipe for success against Ohio State. But if you can do some things with some levels, some high-low, some overs, some take them out and then bring somebody behind, those type of things are where they had some success last year. And if you can get back to that, then I think you can have success this year because you do have playmakers in that position. And Jaden Harrison's another example of a guy that can do that. They'll do some things with Jordan Faison where they bring him in motion and stack him, and he's the guy working over the middle of the field. So you have weapons there, Trev. And you have some matchups there that you can take advantage of if you're willing to be creative and find ways to do it. We just got to find out if they're willing to be creative and find ways to do it. That's going to be the big thing. But teams that have done that have had success. When Texas is rolling, that's kind of where they went. When Michigan State had some big plays early in the pass game, that's where they went. Now, can you do it for 4 quarters? That's a much different question. And the answer is no, you're not going to go rip them out. But that's how you get some of those chunk plays that are going to help you out. So you may throw for 210 and 60 of those came on 2 plays. That's what you need against this Ohio State team, because you're just not going to 10-yard drive them 5 times. You're not going to go on 5 10-yard or 10-play, 70-yard touchdown drives in Ohio State and score 35. You're just not going to do it. You need to be able to generate some chunk plays. And despite the criticism this offense gets, they are a big play offense in the run game. And then we've seen more of it in the pass game at times this offseason as well. We saw the post route to Jordan Faison. They were very aggressive throwing the ball down the field against Penn State. You're going to need more of that against Ohio State. This isn't going to be a ground and pound game. You're going to need to be able to make some plays. And you've got the tight ends and slots and backs to do that against them. And that's another reason that I do feel like Notre Dame has some opportunities to have some success in this game. But then there's also areas, Trevor, that are concerns that Notre Dame is going to have to perform on. It's the O-line, D-line. How's that going to do? We talked a lot about that, or talk a little bit about more of that in the matchup section. But that's a concern. Notre Dame's yet again dealing with injuries on the offensive line against a really good defense. It's just are, And then can they make plays in the pass game? Those are my 2 big concerns. Can the Notre Dame it's funny because my number one thing in both areas is related to the offensive line. The offensive line can move the ball on Ohio State, but they could also get whooped. We don't know what we're going to get from that unit. First of all, we don't know who's going to start.
I was just about to say, we don't even know what the unit's going to be, and I think that's what gives me the most pause. Yeah. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, you're good, man. But that's a big question mark. It's the same thing against Penn State. I said, look, somebody asked me, I think I might say on the show, I was asked on other shows last week, friends of mine, he's like, what is your big concern? And the concern was that they just get beat up front. That was the big concern. And for the first half, they did. And that's why they trailed 10-3. In the second half, they didn't, which is why they won the game. You don't want to wait till the third quarter to figure it out against Ohio State, because this is a better offense than Penn State. And that's the big question mark and the big concern is getting beat up front. And then the other one is they have players that can make plays, but will they? That when this offense has struggled, that's been the 2 issues. Receivers don't step up and make plays, and the O-line gets whooped. And this is a defense capable of whooping them in both areas.
Yeah, the biggest concerns for me, all tie into the downfield passing game. It's similar. Do you remember when Alabama was going on their run, and almost every single, their dynasty run from basically, 2009 to 2020, call it. And everybody talked about how in order to beat Alabama on offense, you have to be willing to attack their man coverage. And I know Ohio State doesn't run a lot of man, but to me, it's the same principle applies. You can't coach afraid of making a mistake, because those were the games that Alabama started beating those big name opponents 35-10 and 42-14, right? Is because it was, we don't want to throw it here because they have that guy, and you have to be willing to attack them downfield. Denzel Burke, great corner. He had one bad week against Oregon, and that is, then everybody started riding home against, Then he started having, everybody's like, you know what? Maybe he's just not that good because of a very small sample size. If you're going to attack anybody downfield, it's Mr. Hold, Davis Enigmanosin. Sure. Literally, if there's a person that you go after, but
Mr. Hold, that's really funny.
Thank you. But, you can't be afraid of, Caleb Downs is over the middle, so we're just going to stay away from the middle of the field. And it's so you're just going to run screens all night? Let him sit down on it. Let him go fill in the alley.
I'll be honest, though. I don't think Denzel Burke's been as good this year as he was last year.
Oh, I don't think so either.
He hasn't been. He's still good, though, right? This is the thing. Not as good Denzel Burke is still better than a lot of corners.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like Benjamin Morrison. People Benjamin wasn't playing his best football early in the year. And then some people took that to like, let's bash Benjamin Morrison and talk about he's not playing as well as he does when he's on his game, but he's still really good.
Yeah.
And the numbers back that up. He was on pace to allow fewer catches, a lower completion percentage, and fewer yards this year than he did last year, even though he wasn't as dominant as we hoped he would be. This is different because he's giving up more plays, more yards per catch, more big plays. And it wasn't just the Oregon game that he's had some moments, but that was the game where he really struggled. Like that was the game where he really got whooped pretty good. But, he gave up a big play last week. But, but the point is the Oregon game, to your point, Trev, is the anomaly. I mean, he didn't allow a single catch the first 2 rounds. And but the thing is, you don't have Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, but you also can't coach afraid. So you don't go at him the same way Oregon did. You're not going to drop back and throw a bunch of bombs on him on straight go routes because you don't have those guys. But, there are things you can do depending on how they're playing. If they're playing a lot of press man, there's things you can do. I think he is vulnerable like Christian Gray is to a good double move off the line because he's very aggressive. If you can beat him at the line, he may get you 3 out of 4 times, but that one time you beat him, you're going to have 3 or 4 steps on him for a big play. Riley's got to hit it. If they play a lot of off coverage, there's things you can do with some out cuts and some corner routes that I've seen teams do against them. And even some teams that aren't great throwers. I mean, like I said, we saw, like I was talking about Michigan State earlier. So those are different aspects of it, Trevor. But your point is true, is you can't coach scared. You can't say, well, we're just going to, like, that hurt Penn State.
Yeah.
Because they were just like, we're not throwing at 15. I mean, we're not going to throw at 15.
No.
And that made it easier to defend them.
Yeah. I mean, the only other concern that I have for Notre Dame offensively, agree with everything that you said. The final thing that I'll add is Riley Leonard being afraid to pull the trigger on some throws. We've seen that throughout the season. And it's for the
including
fear
the postseason.
Yes. And it's been for a fear of making mistakes. Now, I hope that it's the mentality of, like if you make a mistake in the Orange Bowl or the Sugar Bowl, you kind of move yourself out of contention to go and play for a national championship. Sure. There's no what ifs after this. You know what I mean? There is no, well, if we turn it over now, then we won't advance to the next round. Like, this is it, man. And that's my fear for Riley Leonard, is he is afraid to pull the trigger on some throws because it could get intercepted by Caleb Downs, or because a Denzel Burke or Davis Enigmanosin could make a really good play on the football. The teams that have had success on Ohio State are the ones that are willing to challenge them down the field. And I'm not saying every play, right? That's not Notre Dame's offense. Riley Leonard's not going to drop back and throw the ball 42 times this game. But at certain points, you have to be willing to take those shots. When you have a matchup on Sonny Styles with a tight end or a slot receiver or a running back, take that opportunity. If there's one thing that I loved seeing from Riley Leonard in the second half of the Penn State game, was his willingness to trust his guys. Yeah. Pressured on third down, you just throw it up to Jaden Greathouse and you assume that your guy is better than the other guy. Have the trust in your playmakers, right? Because to our point, they have playmakers, right? Like it's not the Tez Johnsons. It's not the Jeremiah Smiths. It's not the Ryan Williams, but they're not a bunch of bums either.
Right.
And so for Riley Leonard, he said it before the postseason starts. He's like, I play with no regrets. I'm just letting it hang out now. It's like, okay, now it's time to really do that. And
to a degree, like something in the chat just said, I'm fine with him being afraid to pull the trigger if he doesn't throw interceptions. You cannot pull the trigger and throw a pick. Completely disagree with that comment. He was better against Penn State when he threw 2 picks than he was throwing the ball against Georgia when he threw none. Way better. Like now, listen, you clean up the interceptions, but here's the deal. What I loved about Riley's performance is, he threw the picks, but you know what he did? It didn't phase him. He kept going at Penn State. And if he had that same mindset, he doesn't throw the 3rd and 9 to Jaden Greathouse. If he's got that same mindset of, you'd be afraid to throw a pick, he doesn't throw the back shoulder to Jaden Greathouse on 3rd and 9. He doesn't throw the wheel route to Mitchell Evans, which was covered. He was covered. He had to make the perfect throw, and Mitchell Evans had to make a great catch. But that's the point you and I have talked about all year. Give your guys a chance to catch the football.
Yeah.
They can't have 3 steps on somebody all the time. Against good teams, it's a one-on-one, throw it up, let Greathouse go make a play. I mean, give Aeneas that opportunity. And the thing that I'm hopeful is that Riley made some big time throws after he threw both of the picks. You hope that carries. Now, you coach up the picks and you're not acceptable because they were both mistakes. They were both read mistakes. You don't need to make that throw, but I'd rather critique that with the mindset of I need to be aggressive than when you're like by the end of the first quarter against Georgia, you're just like, he ain't feeling it. He's just not willing to throw the football. So we're gonna have to do something different. Like, you got a better shot of beating Ohio State with the Riley Leonard from Penn State, even with an interception, than you do of the Riley Leonard against Georgia.
100%.
The reason why, you're not going to beat Ohio State, in my opinion, scoring essentially 6 offensive would be what they scored 9 offensive points. Because you had the one touchdown drive. The only touchdown drive you had was on a 13-yard field.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to beat Ohio State scoring 9 offensive points where you didn't have a short field.
Right. Because you can't bank on a short field.
Right.
Yeah. No,
right.
I agree.
But I'm saying I don't even know if that's going to be enough to beat Ohio State.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because, are you going to assume you're going to get that 13-yard field and you're assuming you're going to get a 98-yard touchdown? Right. So I think that too many people don't understand how playing football works. And you can't pick and choose when a quarterback, he's either aggressive or he isn't.
Yeah.
And you can't say, well, you got to be aggressive, but good God, don't ever make a mistake. That's why Brian Kelly's quarterbacks failed for a decade. That's because we want to be aggressive, but don't ever make a mistake. And that's a problem. Like, you got to live with that a little bit. I mean, you can't win championships throwing interceptions. Deshaun Watson's on the phone. He'd like a word with you. I mean, you got to let him play. He's got to be aggressive. And you can't say, well, I want that throw, but I don't want that throw. That's part of the package.
Yeah.
Now, you don't want 2 of them, and just make better decisions in those. Be aggressive, but just go to this guy and aggressive and don't go to that guy and be aggressive. But I don't think people understand the mindset of a quarterback has to be this. And sometimes that's going to result in mistakes.
Yeah.
And you hope that they're not turnovers, but you need that mindset. You can't be like, nah, I don't want him to do that if it's going to be that. No, you can't do that. That's how you get beat. And if you're going to get beat letting it all hang out.
100%.
I took my shot. You know what I mean? Like, man, I wish I would have made that throw. I wish I would have made. No, you can't have that. Look, I took my shot and the defense made a play on it. All right, I'm going to go back. I got another drive, so I'm going to go back at it. That's football. That's football. And you can't say, well, it's not like a buffet where it's like, I want that one, I want that one, I want that one, but I don't want that one. No, this is like, dude, this is the whole package.
Yeah. And
if you want the Riley Leonard, that's the playmaker we saw against Penn State, he may throw a pick in this game. All right. You need to make sure it's not a truly a hugely costly one. And that was the thing that hurt him against Penn State. Those were costly turnovers because the second one, especially because it set up a touchdown when you had a lot of the momentum. But you got to live with that. I mean, you have to live with that. Well, and I think even now, the person in the chat, you just don't get it. I understand that. You just don't get it. You don't understand how football works. It's the mindset. And that's just who Riley Leonard is. And Riley Leonard's a whole lot better than the Georgia version of Riley Leonard.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, couple things. One, the thing that made Mitchell Evans great, talking about his contested catch in the Penn State game, when he was going on his tear in 2023, it wasn't because he had 5 steps on every single guy that he was just a route technician. I mean, the thing that made him great against Ohio State and against Duke, outside of one seam route where he was wide open, it's because he was making crazy one-handed contested catches. Like, that's why everybody loved Mitchell Evans. And I think that's what Riley is, finally starting to see in game number 15 of, hey, if I just throw it in the vicinity of 88, he has a great catch radius. But no, you brought it up perfectly, man. I mean, the Deshaun Watson thing, Dabo Swinney was asked about it heading into the postseason. They were, hey, are you going to do anything about, Deshaun Watson turning it over this much? And Dabo was like, no, because that's who he is. It's not that he's a turnover machine, but if I ask him to stop throwing interceptions, then he's going to stop making the great throws as well.
You clean up the mistakes that lead to interceptions, but you don't do it in a way where the guy just becomes less aggressive.
Right.
That's the point.
Right.
It's not saying, well, I'm okay with him throwing 17 interceptions. It's like what you have to understand is the mindset that led to that pick is the same mindset that led to the 2 huge plays that won us the football game.
Not being afraid.
Right.
And that's the thing that's plagued Notre Dame's quarterbacks. I mean, there's so many examples that you could go back through and look at. You know, like a lot of things that people talk about, like with Brett Favre, is how many interceptions he threw. He was also a gunslinger. The dude also led the league in touchdown passes for a while. Like, it's just like you have to be willing to take those sort of risks. And I'm never saying that like it's Riley taking risks is throwing into quadruple coverage, but like that's not no. But if you throw an interception because it's, one of them is a bad ball, right. The other one, the defender makes a great play on it. To me, it's like, look, it's at least you push the ball down the field, and we're having this conversation around Notre Dame and Riley Leonard and the interceptions he threw in a game that they won.
Right.
Like I would
partly
understand
because of some of the big plays he made.
Right.
Now, again, the first interception, I didn't like it. I can live with it. I didn't like it. The second one was a big mistake. We are saying you clean that stuff up. But I'd rather live with that than what we've seen in other games where he just is unwilling to pull the trigger. Because, again, it worked against Georgia. Why? Because we said going in, they're going to shut that offense down. That offense is not scoring on Notre Dame, no matter who's playing quarterback. We said that. This isn't Georgia. This is a defense that's better than Georgia's and an offense that's better than Georgia's. And so what you have to have is you don't need a repeat of the Georgia game. You don't want a repeat of the Penn State game because you don't want the 2 picks. But the mindset of the Penn State game is the one you need. It flat out is. And you can't say, well, I'm okay with that as long as it doesn't turn into interceptions, because then you're now Brian Kelly. And you're just like, I'd rather you take, the check downs and do all that than actually try to make a play because I'm so afraid of a turnover. That's the point. And that's what Riley's going to have to be in this game, is more aggressive and be you can still be smart and be more aggressive. And I promise you, Mike Denbrock's not like, hey, listen, I'm cool with both those picks because you made these other plays. It's like, hey man, I love your aggressiveness, but we got to be smarter here. Yeah. And it's not so much about, you can't throw a pick there, man. You can't, no, it's, I love the aggressiveness, but hey, listen, look at this guy, look at Mitchell Evans coming across open. Like, listen, if they're high-lowing you that much, and that linebacker's getting that much depth, guess what? He can't plant and drive on the crossing route to Mitch Evans. That's the point. You coach that up, but you don't focus on the turnovers. You focus on the read. You focus on the process. And that's the difference. And when Brian Kelly was the coach, it was don't turn it over, don't turn it over, don't turn it over. That can't be the mindset. And of course you can't turn it over. But it's not focusing on the turnover, it's focusing on the process. Yeah. And that's what you clean up, but you can't clean up you can't change the mindset. I love the aggressiveness, but that guy's getting underneath that seam, which is why you didn't have as much room as you did 2 plays before when you won. Because that's what I think happened to Riley. He had that play 2 plays before, and he wanted it again. And yeah. 100%. And so he forced it. Right? Okay, I get it. I like that mindset. You can't force it. The second one was just a terrible read. He didn't see the guy. I mean, it wasn't, I don't think he was trying to force a ball into double coverage. No, I don't think he saw deny Dennis Sutton dropping into coverage. No, I don't think so either. He made no attempt to get it over that kid. Just don't think he saw him. You can't make that mistake. That's not a mindset thing, though. Yeah. We've seen him do that in games where he was being less aggressive. Can't do that. I want the aggressiveness. It was funny, too, because in the broadcast when that happened, they were like, yeah, like, I understand, like, trying to fit it over him. And I was like, no, he just didn't see him. Who said he was trying to fit it over him? The broadcast crew. No, he was not. That was a rope. He was not at all trying to fit it over that guy. He didn't see him. No. They're like, yeah, like it's, Evans was open if you put a little bit more touch on it. But, I think he just underestimated the size of denied Dennis Sutton. I was like, no, he just didn't see him. He was trying to throw a rope back shoulder play to keep the safety from coming over. And if he puts air on it, the safety either drills Mitchell Evans or picks it off. Yeah. He didn't see him. I mean, but you can't make that mistake. You got to see him, right? 100%. But it was a good call by Penn State, too, dropping denied Dennis Sutton, who's been killing your offensive tackles in the coverage. It's good play calling there by Penn State. So the point is you clean up those things and you focus on the process. The process is to be aggressive, but be aggressive within the structure of the offense. Like don't That's the thing about the Georgia Tech interception. That just wasn't the read.
Right.
I love the aggressiveness, but like there was no reason to throw that football. It's not even about how can you can't turn it over there. No, it's like, dude, what did you see there that made you, coach, I'm trying to be aggressive. That's cool. I'm fine with that. But no, that's not the place for that, because this is what he did. The focus isn't on trying to be aggressive. The focus is what's the read, right? It's not the pick that I'm worried about. It's the process.
Yeah.
Right. And the process is going to lead you to be more aggressive. And after that interception, he ripped Georgia Tech up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've liked about Riley. And that's why I feel like he needs to be more aggressive, because sometimes when he's had an early turnover, he's gone out and played really well after that. I'm not advocating for an early turnover, because that can get you down 14-0 real quick against Ohio State.
Totally.
They go down and score, you get the ball, you turn it over, and then it's 14-0, and now you have to throw the ball. And they know you have to throw the ball. It's not what I'm talking about. You know, and I'm not saying it's he did well because of the turnover. What I'm saying is those are games where he's been more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Louisville game, he was more aggressive. And that's why they jumped out early. So they're going to need that mindset from him, Trev. No question about it.
Well, that's what I've loved about Riley Leonard. I won't lie. It took me a couple of games to get used to it. But like, him being cool is his meal ticket. Like, that's what it is. Like, don't lose your cool. Like, that's what it took me a while. You know, early in the season struggles, throws an interception, jogs off the field, joking with people on the sideline, sitting down laughing. But like, I've learned now, after watching him for 15 games, like, that's just how he copes. And I won't lie, he got a little close in that Penn State game to losing that cool. Like, because he was frustrated with himself, right? Like, it's not because he was mad at any other player for not doing their job. He's his own worst critic, and he's been, you know, quoted saying that. The offensive coaching staff has. But yeah, I mean, it's his resiliency to bounce back and to have that short memory, because that is one aspect about playing quarterback that's really difficult that not a lot of people talk about, is flushing bad plays, because everything that you do is so highlighted, and Riley Leonard does a really good job of it, man. He really does. And without it, they wouldn't have had that second half that they did. If he wasn't aggressive, if he didn't flush the bad plays, I mean, it was awesome to see, man. It was really, really good to see. So, going to do it for the second portion, where we kind of gave the overview of the Ohio State defense. What we're going to do now is we're going to kind of provide some numbers and stack it up on paper, just to put some numbers behind some of the things that we're talking about here. But folks, before we get there, be sure to hit that like button and that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. The best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.